Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Josmar Trujillo. I'm with Cop Watch Media. We're here for an interview with an important guest, Joshua Lopez, the nephew of John Collado. Josh has been one of the most relentless activists, protesters, freedom fighters in the city that I've come across in years. And we want to take some time today to talk to him a little bit about what happened to his uncle at the hands of the NYPD, and what ever came of an investigation that was requested into the cop that killed his uncle by the Civilian Complaint Review Board. So we'll get into it a little bit, but first, Josh, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Josmar, and thank you for that great introduction.
No doubt, brother. So Josh, I guess let's just start for people who don't know. Let's just start from the top. Who was your uncle and what happened to him?
Well, my uncle's name was John Collado. Back on September 6th of 2011, my uncle was cooking lasagna for his wife, his 2-year-old child, and his mother. So he went to the store to go buy some ingredients for the lasagna he was cooking. So as he steps out to go to the store in Upper Manhattan Inwood area on Dykeman and Post, um, he was walking to the store. So some lady just comes up to my uncle, and she tells my uncle that two men are fighting, and the fight is breaking out right near his building where he lived at. So my uncle, this lady, I'm assuming she went to my uncle to let him what's going on, to let him know what's going on, because my uncle was known to be a good person in the neighborhood, always there for the people in the neighborhood. So my uncle turns around and starts like jogging back to in front of the building where he lived, and he notices also two men fighting. One of them was his neighbor, and the other one was a undercover police officer that he had no idea was an officer. This man never identified himself as an officer. So as my uncle stepped in between both of them to try to separate them and try to stop two people from hurting each other, the officer pulled out his gun and shot my uncle in the stomach. So as my uncle is on the ground in pain and screaming in pain, other officers that worked with Officer James Connolly, undercover James Connolly, his team didn't exactly know where he was at, his location, and that's that. This officer had a radio, he had a walkie-talkie, but he didn't inform his team of what where he was at or what was going on. So my uncle, as he's laying on the floor, shot in pain. Responding officers came to the scene, and one of the officers that James Connolly's partner, I believe is James White, he kicked my uncle to see if he was still alive, or instead of checking a pulse or anything, he kicked my uncle while he was on the ground, and this officer that killed my uncle had also used deadly force prior to my uncle, and we come to find out this 4 years later after my uncle was murdered.
And he was a detective at the time, right? James Connolly.
Yes, he was a detective at the time, and after murdering my uncle, he got promoted by ex-mayor Bill de Blasio and ex-police commissioner Bill Bratton. He got promoted to sergeant.
So when this happened, your uncle, was there an initial investigation? Was there anything done by the city or any officials at all to kind of see what had happened?
According to the the police department investigated, the firearms investigated, and also the firearm discharge investigated. But if there was a real investigation, there was enough sufficient evidence that the officer James Connolly was lying about the incident that took place on September of 2011.
And that's key. So he lied about what happened. What is it that he lied about specifically?
He stated in his report that my uncle had him in a chokehold from behind, but one of his partners' testimony contradicted that. one of the officers that came to the scene and finally noticed where his partner James Conley was. He noticed that my uncle and James Conley were both facing each other and before the shot rang out, and not like James Conley stated that my uncle was from behind him choking him and lift him off the ground.
So he's probably arguing that he was fighting for his life because he was getting choked out, and that's why he shot him. That's what he was lying about.
Yes, and there was clearly no evidence to back that story up. They took him to the hospital to check if he had any injuries. Mind you, my uncle weighed at least 100 pounds more than this officer, and there was no marks, bruises on his neck. So there was so much evidence that the officer was lying. And years later, a video even surfaced.
So after this happens, around the time when I met you, you became involved in a lot of like protests, marches, and this is around the time of the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. Tell us a little bit about that and what you've been doing, fighting for your uncle's, for justice for your uncle.
Well, throughout the years, I have stood in solidarity with other families that also been affected by police violence, not only here in New York City, but nationwide, because I already knew that my uncle's case was not an isolated incident. I have heard of prior incidents where police killed innocent people like the Diallo, Anthony Baez. So I heard of so many police killings. So I knew that there was something I had to do, and I wanted to search for the truth, what really happened to my uncle as well. So I not only stood up with other families and also activists in this movement, and this was before the Black Lives Matter movement like really came to about, because I believe that the Black Lives Matter movement came when they murdered Trayvon Martin in Florida back in 2013. So before that, my uncle's case and also police killings wasn't getting too much attention. It was the 10-year anniversary of the attacks of 9/11, the September 11 attacks, and also Occupy Wall Street was getting a lot of attention. So my uncle's case wasn't really publicized too much on the media like that, like police killings are now.
Yeah.
But I tried my best to tell his story and really search for the truth out there, and I came about finding more evidence that the officer was lying, and I have found that there was so many other families going through the same thing I was going through.
Yeah. So around 2019. Before the pandemic. So full disclosure, I've been working with Joshua. I've known him for years, and then we got together to push for what eventually became a request of the Civilian Complaint Review Board. It was about 2019. We demanded an investigation. Tell us a little bit about that and why you felt it was important to push for an investigation years later.
Okay, so back in 2011, when my uncle was murdered, his wife filed a complaint with the CCRB, but she didn't continue with the process of this investigation. So I guess it died out. But then we found out that the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, they had initiative ballot where they have more power, where now they could come after officers for lying. And we had so much evidence that Officer James Conley was lying for years. He kept lying and saying the same story, that my uncle was choking him. So I thought this was a great opportunity for us to file a new investigation into James Conley's lies. And we had evidence to prove that he was lying. So that's when we filed a new investigation in 2019. And the investigation had about 3 years, I say 3 years and change into that investigation by the CCRB.
Yeah. So now give us an update of what ended up happening with the investigation. Tell our audience.
Well, I feel like I should have been more on top of them. Like I should have been calling them at least once a week and things like that of that nature. But then in 2020, a year later, after we filed the complaint for the investigation on Conley, there was the George Floyd murder that happened in 2020. So there was a lot of nationwide protests going on. So in 2020 in New York City, police officers arrested and brutalized many protesters. I was one of them. They got arrested in pepper spray for peacefully protesting in the Bronx. So right now the CCRB kind of like let my uncle's case like slip away because they focus more on what was making headlines on the news, and they like let this one slip away. They had the power to even interview James Connolly through Zoom because of the pandemic of COVID that we was facing. So they had the power to do an interview through Zoom, but they let that slip away. And James Connolly ended up calling in sick when he found out that he was being investigated and possibly going to be interviewed and lose his job and pension. So he got word from another officer that was going to happen. So when he found out that the interview was going to happen, he called in sick for a couple of days. And the CCRB just let that slip away. And he came back to work for a couple of days just to retire.
Mm. So he retired, which means now the investigation is over, right?
Yes, the investigation is over. The only thing I think was good out of all this was he got to retire before his 20 years and he didn't collect a full pension. So I believe that we cost him a couple of thousands of dollars due to him retiring before them 20 years.
Right, because he didn't get his full pension. He got like 3/4 of it.
Yes. But my goal was to to have him fired without a pension because this officer had 2 murders already under his belt.
Yeah, that's horrible. And you mentioned before about that CCRB didn't prioritize your cases. What do you think is some of the problems with the CCRB and cases like yours that maybe aren't in the news like that? Do you think that they are just focusing only on what's hot and what's kind of like in the papers?
Yes, I definitely believe that they do focus on cases where it's getting national attention or not even national attention, but it's all over the media, or the ones that got politicians backing them up, or Al Sharpton. We didn't have any of that. It was just you and I that filed this complaint and was going forward with it and everything. So it's like our team was just you and I. We didn't have all these politicians, Al Sharpton, any of them people.
Yeah. So let's talk about how the CCRB fucked this up, because there's no way to sugarcoat it. So it took years, but they had the ability to interview him, and they weren't aggressive enough in doing it. The CCRB has been asking for new powers and got some new powers, as you mentioned before, including now the ability to file complaints even when there's not a complainant. Right, they're supposedly being more aggressive, and I think it happened with the George Floyd protests. They wanted to do something, or at least say they were doing something about all of the violence that the cops were inflicting on protesters. But what does it mean for you that you've been fighting for all this time, for years and years, and they just kind of like just failed you? How does that make you feel?
Oh wow! You know what? When I got the news of James Connolly retiring, it was so painful. It was so I felt like when my uncle was murdered, I felt like everything just rewinded, and I feel like those 11 years was, I can't say a waste of time, because I've met so many great people in this movement like yourself, and so many other families and stuff like that. But I felt like I gave it so much to try to hold this officer accountable in any type of way. So I felt like the CCRB definitely failed me, and they never have the power to actually fire officers. They just have the power to make a recommendation. So and then it also comes down, the final say. It comes down to the police commissioner.
Right.
So I think all that needs to be changed. If we really want to see police being held accountable, I think that needs to be changed. We need to pass a bill to get rid of the CCRB.
So, what do you say to people, who are watching this, who may think that, there's an oversight agency, there's these agencies that hold the NYPD accountable, and that's the best that we can do? What do you say to them? What's important in cases when cops kill people, if the agencies are not going to hold them accountable?
You know what? It makes it dangerous not only for us in our communities to black and brown folks, but it also makes it dangerous for their own colleagues. Now we can determine which are the good ones, which are the bad ones. They all wear the same uniform, badges, and you know, uh, like I said, we need to pass a bill to overthrow this agency and possibly start a community power act where we'll have like a elected empower independent prosecutor and also ECRB, people that are elected. Yeah, elected into holding police accountable. We don't need people that are assigned by the mayor to hold police accountable, because it's a conflict of interest once you have police investigating police.
Yeah, yeah, and that's been something that myself and others were going to these board meetings that CCRB was having. A handful of them are chosen by the mayor, a handful of them are chosen by the police commissioner. So those selections to the board already are interested in the city not being made to look bad, and there's some that are selected by the city council and other elected officials. But yeah, it's kind of it's kind of we've seen it. We've talked about it as a useless kind of agency, or a toothless agency. It doesn't have the power to fire someone. Commissioner gets final say. But even in cases where they have the investigation in their laps, and you gave them court documents, you gave them transcripts, you followed this case, you've been protesting, bringing attention to this case for 11 years, and they still weren't able to follow through. It was just, I want to say, Josh, number one, my hat's off to you for fighting this hard for so long. But also, he did lose part of his pension, but I think it's also an important lesson for our viewers to see is these oversight agencies, they're not necessarily doing everything they can to help people, but especially in cases where you don't have a lot of flashy politicians or con men like Al Sharpton, they can kind of not be aggressive enough in bringing justice to this case. And it's horrible because it's been so long, and it was such an obvious, it was just such an obvious injustice that they weren't able to at the very least, get this cop fired. But anything else you want to say to anybody else out there? Any ways to get in contact with you, or things that you got coming up in 2023?
Thank you for that, Josmar. I do have something coming up in 2023. I'm planning on doing a street naming for my uncle, because it's gonna be on March 25th, which is on a weekend, on a Saturday, possibly 1 p.m. And I'm looking forward for this street naming, because I want folks to always remember my uncle, that he lived and died in that neighborhood for attempting to break up a fight. In my eyes and my heart, that's a true hero right there. And not only the community, but I also want cops to, whenever they pass through that neighborhood, to always be reminded of the bad deed that they did, their comrades and all that. Like, because a lot of them, they support each other. So I want them to always be reminded that they did a bad deed. And I also want to warn other families that are affected by policing, not only police killings, but police brutality. So if you ever file a police complaint with the CCRB, you have to be on top of them, because if you're not, they might just jump on another case that's making media and things like that. So you just got to stay on top of them if they're still around in the years to come. But Yeah, I don't give up. Even though this happened in my uncle's case, I don't give up because I'm fighting for other families as well. I don't want other people to go through what my family went through. And the one that has supported me from the beginning was you. You was out there with me, Josmar. So I'm grateful for you. And you really paid attention to my uncle's killing and what happened to him. And it was an injustice that happened, and so I thank you for standing with me.
Well, of course, man. And we're all going to keep standing with you. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to hope to get this story out. Guys, you should remember that name, John Collado. His memory is going to live on in Dykeman and all the anti-police brutality movement. People have to make sure that these names, even the ones that you don't hear of a lot in the newspapers or the news media, that they're really important and their family members are fighting for them. And just also just a special shout out and a fuck you to Sergeant or now retired James Connolly, because he got to leave with his pension. He got to go home. He got to live the rest of his life with his family and do whatever the fuck he's doing. But he got away with killing an innocent man. So big fuck you to James Connolly, but a big thank you to Joshua for joining us today. Thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you guys for having me. It's an honor, and thank you for letting me share my uncle's story.
No doubt.